Absolutely excellent. Thank you very much, Francisco. Thank you very much as well to my hosts in Brazil. My apologies that I could not make the arrangements to be there in person. This is definitely second best, but we will make it work and make this as an enjoyable presentation as possible. Before I do anything else, I know that our interpreters have probably the most difficult job of all because they have to translate a lot of technology and a lot of technical terms, and I would like to very much express my appreciation to the translators as well as to the whole audience for inviting me and for letting me give this presentation. This presentation is a beginner's guide to Fusion Middleware. This is Oracle's Fusion Middleware. And my big question is, does anybody have experience with Fusion Middleware? Because if you do, perhaps this will be too simple. My intention is to provide an overview of Fusion Middleware, all of the Fusion Middleware, including Weblogic Server, perhaps clear up some of the confusions, especially in terminology in the language that Oracle uses with the product and the entire product suite. I will show you some websites. We'll not get into any live demos, unfortunately, but I certainly have some screen cams, screenshots that we can present during the discussion. And I am more than happy to follow up with specific webcasts on individual topics within this very, very large discussion of Fusion Middleware. To start out with, who am I? My name is Hans Forbrich, or Hans Forbrich, or some people just say, hey you. I'm the owner and principal consultant of Forbrich Computer Consulting Limited in Canada, and I spend a lot of my time consulting and working with Oracle University in Canada and in the United States. I first started with computers in 1969 when I had the joy of front panel switch programming on a PDP-8i. Worked through many, many different computers, different operating systems, and started with the Linux, or the Unix at that time, operating system, Sun OS 0.8 in 1982, 83, and became involved with the Oracle product suite, in particular the Oracle database in 1984 when Oracle database was at version 4. I've worked for Oracle, I've worked for a number of other companies, as well as now I work for myself, but I am an Oracle University partner, so I do a lot of training with Oracle University, and am actually very honored to have been recognized in North America as the Oracle University Instructor of the Year for this last year. As well, I have the privilege of being an Oracle ACE Director and joining other such notable people as Ronald, Francisco, and Daniel. So again, the agenda that I have, an overview of Fusion Middleware, talking about Java J2EE, JEE, the core of the entire operation, describing for, especially for DBAs, what it is that we're dealing with. And then looking at WebLogic Server, some of the experiences with installation, where to look for help, and hopefully some time for conclusions and questions and answers. So what is middleware? It is the software that runs between the user and the data, between the user's browser and the database. I really don't care whether we're talking Oracle database or MySQL or some of the other, we won't mention their names, types of databases that are out there. Middleware runs the business logic as well as the display logic. Middleware was introduced in the 1990s, and actually even earlier, but became popular in the 1990s because, in very large part, because of Java, and because of some of the comments that actually Larry Ellison made about the importance of Java to the business communities. It's very important to realize that middleware has two significant areas that sometimes are separated, but sometimes are merged together. One area is the business area, so the triggers, the validation, the business logic, which step do we do next, and so on. The other area is the display logic. How do we paint the screen? How do we display what we're looking at, perhaps on a browser, perhaps using some technology like Ajax or other technology, JavaScript, and so on. The purpose of middleware is ultimately to reduce maintenance cost and maintenance time. In many cases, we may have situations where it is impossible to look at or to physically update the end user's computer. In other cases, we may be able to use the end user's computer, but the cost of dealing with 2,000, 3,000, or 100,000 end user machines becomes much too large. Whereas the cost of using and updating perhaps 10, 15 computers that are in our data center might be much more manageable. Many people are interested in middleware, but I caution very much against putting a lot of, or throwing everything into middleware, because I remind you, from even my experience, data may live 30 years or more. It's not unusual to see customer data living a long, long time. However, the applications, the application technology, the application stack can change very, very rapidly. 3 years, 5 years. A well-designed application may live as much as 10 to 12 years, but certainly not as long as the data. So, as developers for middleware software, I encourage us to remember that and not put everything, all pieces of information and knowledge, into middleware. Okay, so let's talk about Fusion middleware. Fusion middleware is Oracle's new implementation of Fusion, of the middleware. It is the technology based on the Weblogic server, as well as many, many components that can be used within the Weblogic server environment, as well as just in a middle tier, non-database tier, or non-end type of environment. It's a stack of those components or pieces of software that provide a framework, very, very keyword here, framework, to deliver secure applications and application parts. So what do we mean by that? Well, first of all, we mean that this is multiple tiers. We have the data, we have the user, and between we have this tier for the middleware. It typically includes an HTTP server, in Oracle's case Apache. It typically includes an application server, such as Weblogic server in our case, perhaps application services and libraries. And I make a very, very clear distinction between the application server and the application services. The services might be forms, if you're still running Oracle Forms, which can be a very good thing, or Discoverer, or SOA Suite, the Service Orchestration Architecture software, or perhaps OBI EE, the Oracle Business Intelligence software. It's a framework, which means that we can create new software based on the services that are provided by the middleware. We learn the API, we learn the interaction, and then we simply continue on by creating the report that we want to see, or the dashboard that we want to see. In many cases, we will use JEE, so Java Enterprise Edition, to provide the programmer's interface for our applications. We may use other services in the framework, such as LDAP and single sign-on, to assist with security and configuration. The stack that we're dealing with, the pieces of software that we're dealing with, start in the center with Weblogic Server. Weblogic Server provides three things. The first thing that we have is the Java virtual machine, which is required to run Weblogic Server. The second thing we have is the Weblogic Server Java Enterprise Edition container. And the third thing that we have is a very, very advanced administrative framework that not only deals with the Java Enterprise Edition, but also with many, many other pieces, such as the system components, the HTTP server, which is Apache, an extended Apache, and we know it as Oracle HTTP server. Other system components can include web cache, can include reports, can include forms, and Discover. These are called system components because they are not primarily Java-driven. They use Java usually for communication or may talk to Java, such as the HTTP server, but they do not, in fact, run Java for the most part. For example, the Forms engine is written primarily in C and C++. Second area is the Java components. These are the ones that are getting a lot of marketing attention from Oracle. The Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, OBI EE, and also things like Web Center, the new portal, service-oriented architecture, and so on. Many other examples exist. As a matter of fact, one place that we can go to see the existence is to go to otn.oracle.com. So otn.oracle.com is the first stop for anybody who wants information about this. You see a link to technical product or product technical information, which I pulled up ahead. And the technical product information that we have will point us to middleware, which is the Fusion Stack. And as you can see from this list here, it just goes on and on and on and has many, many pieces that we can work with, many of which have an API programmer's interface that we can utilize. This page and these links give us more information, give us access to demonstrations, give us access to documentation, white papers, even access to the user community, the forums, where we can get a lot of additional information. So the Fusion middleware environment very largely looks like this. We will have on the one side, over on this side here, the Weblogic server environments. These are Java components where we'll have the pure Java applications and the primary administrative console, admin. On the other side, we will have the system components such as OID, forms, OHS, and much of that will be controlled through, if you had time with the Oracle Application Server, you'll recognize the name OPMN, the Oracle Process Monitor and Notification Processes. These applications, these system components, could all talk to both customer data as necessary, as well as have access to metadata, which controls how they operate and flow. One of the first things that people want to know, always, is how to install it. Not what it does, not how to work it, but how to install it. I need to play with it. I need it up tomorrow. As compared to other Oracle products, the Fusion middleware install has 5 fundamental steps, and you pretty well should take them in order. It is not, repeat, not streamlined to collapse these steps, because Oracle's philosophy is that you select what you need and install only what you need. One criticism Oracle had from before was we installed the Enterprise Edition of the application server and got everything. Why did we need it? Well, the answer is we did not need it, but Oracle just installed it. So Oracle's response to that, because of the user community, is that we will install in the following order. If we need a repository, we'll install a database. We select the version of the database we need. I encourage people to use 11G Release 2 database, have that in place, configured the way we want for backup, recovery, and so on. And then we put in the schemas that we need to actually operate the users or the components that we want. If we want to have LDAP, we then use the LDAP repository configuration and the ODS, Oracle Data Source or Directory Services schema. If we wanted other ones, the single sign-on, we'd install the single sign-on schemas, and so on. They're all available through a fairly streamlined repository configuration utility. After that, on the computers, or computers, plural, that we're dealing with, we may want to install Weblogic Server, especially if we're trying to administer or deploy Java. Then install whatever the software is that we need, perhaps LDAP, OID, Internet Directory, perhaps Forms, perhaps Discover, whatever it is that we need for our application. And then we do the configuration. I have screenshots for this. If we run out of time, feel free to look at them when we post the presentation. It's important to realize that, again, we will do this in a set of discrete steps. It's not automated for our flexibility because we, as users, requested Oracle make this change for us. So we're going to spend a little time now looking at the Java and JEE environments. This is the core behind Weblogic Server. I spend time looking at the theory or the concepts because I find many people are not clear about the basics. Remember again, this discussion is oriented towards the DDA who has now been told you have to administer the Weblogic server or Fusion middleware. So we'll look at that in particular. We'll start out by what is Java? I've always looked at Java as having three major parts, possibly a fourth. The three parts are first the Java language. The second is an operating environment, almost a computer specific to Java, and we call that a Java virtual machine. And the third part is a standard set of libraries that perform our common tasks. I often say I can teach anyone to learn the Java language in about 2 days. It will take another 3 to 6 months to become very comfortable with the libraries. For example, if you want to print to a printer, you have to learn about the input and output APIs, which are done in the libraries. Very good concept, building on the previous work, building on layers to get the flexibility we need. But as always, flexibility has a trade-off, and that trade-off is, as developers and administrators, we need to know a relatively large API. To help people understand how things fit, I have this approximate timeline so that you have a feeling when things happened and why we have certain terminology. So back in the very early 1990s, James Gosling, out of Sun Microsystems, was looking at a project to literally create a new language and operating environment for micro devices, for keychains and so on, intelligent, very small devices. He looked at the existing programming languages, saw their problems, and came up with a new language based on C++ that tried to eliminate the most common coding and development problems that we ran into. That became Java around 1994. So we started out with Java, an initial virtual machine, an initial set of libraries. A few years later, they did many upgrades, started working on performance issues in the Java virtual machine. We ended up with Java virtual machine, Java language, and libraries 1.1. But the language was really not significantly changed. Towards the end of 1997, 1998, they realized and actually released a new version of the language. The language was enhanced. They actually changed, added some structures to it, added some other capabilities to the language. And we're so excited about this change that they called this Java 2. It was released with language version 1.2, Java Virtual Machine 1.2, and libraries 1.2. The libraries became big enough that we split them into Mobile Edition, Standard Edition, and Enterprise Edition, and we'll look at some of the differences later. The libraries got changed, the virtual machine got enhanced, got sped up, but the language didn't change. It stayed at 1.2. A little while later, some more changes. We went to 1.3 for the libraries, 1.4 for the libraries, and then we changed the language again. We added annotations, we added things like enums, new structures, quite a few significant changes. And we called that the new Java. But there became confusion. Is this Java 3 because it's the third version of the language? Or is it Java 5 because it's tied to Java Virtual Machine 1.5? So they decided to drop the number and simply call the new ones JEE or Java Enterprise Edition, Standard Edition, and so on. So if you look at J2EE and compare that to JEE, the J2EE is not as good, is older than JEE. Keep that in mind as you're trying to keep things straight. I like to look at Java, those three components, the language, the virtual machine, and the libraries, visually, as I have here. We start out with the Java virtual machine. You add the libraries, and then you can plug in your application. You have to run your application. You compile the application into Java bytecode, and then you say, Java virtual machine, run my application. The virtual machine will start, run, stop. The problem comes when we want Enterprise Edition. Enterprise Edition or enterprise software shouldn't have the time and overhead to start for each user's application, and shouldn't stop at the end of each user's application just because there's a lot of time and overhead involved with starting and stopping. So instead, we'll have a layer, or what we call a container, to actually manage to bring up that Java virtual machine, and then we write our applications to the container, to the API of the container. So Java programming environment, we compile using Java C, compile. We run using Java space and the name of the program, the name of the object class. But if we want to write or run Enterprise Edition, we've already started, we've already run the application, the Java virtual machine. Our applications, our forms, our ADF, Application Developer Framework things, those things will actually work with the container and have to interact with that container directly. Let's look at this a little bit. Okay, so the Java Enterprise Edition has a lot of libraries. And the purpose of these libraries is to provide services to our applications. Services such as connect to a database. When I release an application, I don't want to have to hard code the database name into my application. My customer might want to move the database. They might want to put it on a different host. So I'll use the JDBC capability to actually point to the database, but I will look up which database I need using a directory or a lookup device, an LDAP database of sort of an LDAP database, which we call JNDI, or Java Native Directory Services. I may use security. JAAS stands for Java Authorization and Authentication Service. And that, again, is a lookup. So each one of these services, 17 services that we deal with, are based on configuration, based on lookup. And as an administrator, I need to know what those services and configurations are. This fact that I can configure is what makes Java Enterprise Edition unique, extremely powerful, and also, for a new DBA, somewhat confusing. So I want to have a form or an ADF or a web service running, first thing I do is write my program to the JEE or Java Enterprise Edition API. I start my application server, my container, by using perhaps Java -jar OC for J.jar, which was the old Oracle application server way. Or I may start the new one using Java, perhaps some memory options, and then specifically call the Weblogic.server class to actually run that particular application. So that will bring up the Java environment, that will bring up the container, and the container will then be able to run your applications and mine. There's a whole life cycle of how these applications run. You can look at that later on in the PowerPoints when they're released on your users group website. I found there are two places to go for useful information for teaching me or teaching people how Java works, how Java Enterprise Edition works. The most important for me is the website called theserverside.com. The organization that runs theserverside.com was heavily involved in the Enterprise Java, Entity Java being specifications, EJBs, and have done a wonderful job, including giving us free downloads to the PDF version of the book Mastering Enterprise Java. Very, very important if you want to understand JEE to have a look through that book. And as I say, it's free. Oracle also publishes all their documentation through Tahiti. Taking a quick look at Tahiti, if you go to tahiti.oracle.com, you'll notice that we can go to the Fusion Middleware documentation, and with the Fusion Middleware documentation, here you have access to the administration guides, and a lot of my information is available through the administration guide, as well as the installation guides. Now, got about 15 minutes left, so let's see what we have to say. Okay, WebLogic Server is Oracle's current implementation of the Java Enterprise Edition engine. So JEE software runs using WebLogic Server. Oracle has gone through several different versions of middleware or Enterprise Edition JEE software. I remember the first one was about 1997, where they had tried to write a variation on Tomcat. Then they purchased the Orion container from Ironflare, and they've made a whole bunch of other changes, enhancements, but finally they decided to purchase the BEA WebLogic Server, that being the basically industry leader in the middleware or JEE engine environment. Most people agree that Oracle has maintained and actually improved the WebLogic Server to a certain extent over what BEA had available, and they continue to actually make it a very important portion of their strategic direction. We will use WebLogic Server for three things. First is to deploy Java Enterprise Edition applications. So it's a JEE environment for pure Java applications, such as OBI, or Oracle Business Intelligence, as well as things like service bus for integrating data between systems, the SOA suite, the service orchestration, web services can be written entirely in pure Java, and many, many other things as well. The third area, WebLogic server area, is actually an administration environment where we have access to a console to start and stop all the different pieces, administer all the different pieces of the application server, of the Fusion middleware environment. This is where much of the confusion comes in. Fusion middleware is not WebLogic server. Fusion middleware uses WebLogic server in the core, in the center. WebLogic server administration tools, however, can be used to administer, to adjust, monitor, and modify Fusion middleware components. So you have a lot of interaction between the two. Here's an example of how we look at it. We will install and manage a WebLogic server domain. The domain is what we call a unit of administration. A domain will have one administration server which can manage the core services such as Apache, such as Forms. And the administration server can also manage JEE managed servers. Those managed servers could be used to deploy the business intelligence or deploy your applications, your specific custom-built applications. Those managed servers can be run independently, so one managed server at a time, or the managed servers could be connected together as a cluster and to allow high availability, consistent deployments, failover, and so on as we need in some mission-critical applications. So one WebLogic server requires at a minimum one administration server, which provides our console, and then optionally one or more managed servers either by themselves or in clusters. Point of confusion, the administration server, of course, is on one machine, but the managed servers can be on several other machines. In fact, you do not have to have a managed server on the same machine as the admin server. So it can be separate. The administration server provides us with an administration console, an enterprise manager console, and other tools such as the WebLogic scripting tool. So WebLogic scripting tool is based on Python. It's a Java version of Python called Jython, Jython. A new administrator will spend most of the time using the WebLogic server console, which can be found usually at the localhost port 7001 using the resource or application called console. If the administrator needs to add a new application, deploy business intelligence, or deploy your Java server faces application, whatever it happens to be, we can add a new managed server. And the managed server would be run using the config shell script or the config batch script in Windows. The managed servers can have their own logs, they can have their own ports, they can be on separate machines, fairly flexible. but you want to administer start and stop from the administration server, either using the script tools, WebLogic Server Tools, WLST, the scripting language, or using the graphical console. Another thing that's often asked, well, how do we start this beast? Pretty simple. If you can find it, you start it using the Start WebLogic shell script. That'll be in the domain, the administrative domain usually, in the bin subdirectory, and you simply run that, usually after having set the correct environment, which would be done using set WebLogic server environment shell script. Although in Windows, it'll actually be buried and embedded. The environment variables will be embedded in your start script. Here's an example of the console that you'd log in as. Browser application, you go to the host, wherever the admin server is. Usually port 7001, that's the default, but if that happens to be used, there will be other values that will increment to 7002 and so on. You log in. The default username is WebLogic. There is no default password. You must provide the password when you install. Once you get into WebLogic Server, you have a rather interesting and very busy navigation and administration console. Many, many tabs available, many pieces of information available. All I can suggest, because of the time, is that perhaps we have a webinar to specifically look at the various tabs, or if you can, Oracle University has just released a very, very nice course called the WebLogic Server Essentials, which go through and spend literally a week teaching how to use the console, look at the implications, set up clusters, set up new managed servers, and so on. Very, very useful and very well done course in my opinion. One of the things that you will do very often is change properties. So depending on what you need, you'll use monitoring techniques and management techniques to identify where your performance issues are or where your security issues are, and then you will go back into these screens to make the appropriate changes, perhaps adding more memory to your Java virtual machine, or more threads so that you can have more concurrent users, and so on. If you have your own Java programs that you want to release, you'll deploy them using the screen, usually. However, you may also want to spend the time to learn the WebLogic scripting tool so that you can run the deployments automatically at command line mode, which makes life much, much easier in the long run. You can also deploy using an ant task, where you have all sorts of ants running around, putting things in the right place. It's interesting to actually spend the time looking at the default ant task configuration. If you want to deploy through a console, well, I'll let you, because of time, I'll let you look at the information, the PowerPoints off of the download them yourself at a later time. The console itself, the administration console, allows you to start, stop, deploy, undeploy as necessary for any particular application. And here you can see highlighted to start or stop a particular application. So very briefly, for about 5 minutes, my experiences in installation, pretty simple. Then we'll go look where to look for help and give you some conclusion and open it up for some questions. See if we have some questions and perhaps even some answers. So installation, the most important thing in installation. Pre-plan. Decide what you want to have in your Fusion middleware environment. The biggest mistake, the biggest time loss at ready to go to production time is not knowing what to download and what order to install it in. So plan ahead. What do we need? Are we running Oracle Forms? If we need Oracle Forms, we will then need to install specifically the Oracle Forms technology. I'm going to take you to download.oracle.com, where it becomes very, very interesting to see the how Oracle has organized the new download information, specifically for Fusion middleware. Go to download.oracle.com, ask for the Fusion middleware, and you'll notice that we have two types of download. One is for deployment. This is production. Or sorry, for development. This is for development included in your Java, JDE, ADF environment. But you also have for deployment, so for production. Let's take a look specifically at the deployment or production environment. Notice that I'm going to accept the license agreement. Makes things easier. What we have is the WebLogic server download, a variety of tools downloaded. But let's say you wanted to have the SOA suite. Go down to the SOA suite, expand the more info. This is very, very, very important. It will tell you what is included in the download, what else you need to look at or get for the download, and what you might want to get. So this is part of your planning. So it says here, oh, you're going to need WebLogic Server. You're going to need the Oracle database, the repository creation utility. You remember me talking about those? You need JDeveloper and possibly some patch scripts. You may also want to have service registry and so on. What you get with this download and with this install is the Beeple Process Manager, the business rules, and all the other parts, including the Enterprise Manager Fusion middleware control, so the Enterprise Manager monitoring and administration screens that we can use. Okay, so pick the pieces that you need. You'll need to spend some time studying this, making sure that you have the right combination. Then you really should install it in the right sequence. First thing would be the database, then the configuration repository using the RCU, and then possibly the WebLogic server. The screen that we have here is the WebLogic server installation, and then the next few screens just show you how to do the install. I'll just get through those. It's pretty well self-contained, not much of an issue at all. At the end of the install, it'll ask you if you want to run the configuration wizard. Just like in the database, do you want a software-only install, or do you want a software plus database? In the WebLogic server, do you want the WebLogic server software-only install, or software plus the configuration, the active WebLogic server domain and instance, and so on. So this is a live install that I did just a few weeks ago. Configuration, and you can then see the actual steps. Last topic, really, where to look for help. You can, of course, for general concepts, go to the serverside.com, go to OTN, use OTN a lot. Besides, OTN are the sponsors for this tour. So I do encourage you to get involved with the community, both as a recipient and as a participant, and get your information from the TechNet. Oracle University has created some very interesting courses lately. I encourage people to look at those. They may be available in Spanish or Portuguese. And I'm also going to publish, or have published, my email address, a special email address created for this tour, a Latin America Oracle Users Group. If you send me a question, I will certainly attempt to answer it. If it's written in Spanish or Portuguese, I'll bother Francisco to help with the translations so that we get both the question and the answers to you as quickly and accurately as possible. A couple of screenshots on how to get the information. Final thing, my experiences. My first experience, if you come from Weblogic server, or sorry, from the Oracle application server, or if your experience is only a DBA, this Weblogic server and Fusion Middleware is a huge change. It is a large set of components, a large set of products. For managers, I encourage them to create a dedicated team, at least one person, if not a whole team, to do the administration. And definitely take as much time to do training and practice as you have available. On OTN, let's see if I've got that available. On OTN, if you look in the OTN pages enough, you will find tutorials. They actually give you examples on how to do much of the administration for the basics of Weblogic server. With that, I'll open it up to questions, if there are any questions. If not, well, I thank you very, very much for your patience and understanding.
Okay, Hans. Thank you so much. They probably have some questions, but right now they are telling me they are a little bit over of time. They're a little bit late for the next session, but they are going to, any questions, your email is just right now on the screen, and they will contact you with any question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My apologies for being late.
Thank you, Hans. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye. Have a safe flight.